What's up YouTube, and welcome back to another charcoal tutorial where today I'm going to go ahead and show you how you can create this goldfish design. Now, as always, there's links to everything you're going to need in the description down below. Check out the requirements section. It will take you over to a post over on my Patreon, and there you'll be able to grab all the assets that you need for today's design. I've edited a photograph of a fish and provided it for you. I'll show you how to create a reference for it. There's equally a guide as well, because we want to just get straight into the action, so you can download the guide as well. And there you'll also find the palette, the canvas size, and anything else that you need for today's design. So again, links in the description down below. When you're done with today's design, make sure to tag me in your finished creations wherever you decide to share them. And if you could subscribe to the channel, that'd be amazing, because I've actually posted a Procreate tutorial every single week for over 4 years now, and I'll continue to do so. So don't miss out on all of that action. And if you want even more tutorials from me, I've got a catalogue of over 130 exclusive tutorials to my Patreon supporters. And there is a link to my Patreon in the description down below, as well as a link to my website where you can see every single design of those tutorials before you join. And that way you know that the content is fit for you or not. So with all that said, enjoy today's tutorial and let's get started. So once you've created your canvas size, you're going to want to go ahead and add in the guide. And you can see there I've added it as a new layer. To do that, go up to your actions, go to the option of add, and insert the photo from your files or your gallery, depending on where you've saved it to. And then in your layer, just simply tap on it and rename it and call it guide. That way you then know exactly what that layer is and you can refer back to it. Of course, the other step that we need to do is go ahead and insert the reference image. So we're going to go up to actions. You want to go ahead and go to canvas. Then we're going to want to go ahead and add in a reference by turning on this toggle here. By default, it adds in a new window that is currently looking at your canvas. We want to go ahead and change that to the option of image. And you're going to want to go ahead and tap on import image and tap on the photo that I've provided, and then it will have dropped the image into there. Now this little window is really cool. You can tap on it to clear it, you can pinch to zoom, you can scale it as well by holding down on a corner. So I typically tend to like it sort of at this sort of scale because I've got a large window then to take a look at, but we're going to go ahead and of course work over here. Now I have equally gone ahead and given you the link to the actual image as well, because the photograph shows that there is a lot of color here in the fish as well, but I'm not interested necessarily in the oranges and yellows. It's more the fact that there is an orange area and this sort of additional kind of bluey white tone, which we're just going to try and add in all the kind of color markings towards the end. So going back into Procreate, and as I typically do, we're going to go ahead and create a new layer, drag it underneath the guide. We're going to want to go to our colors and grab the color here. It is the top of the 4th column. Go to your brush, and the brush of choice for the charcoals is the same one that we've used previously. It's the 6B compressed. Let's go ahead and just set the opacity to 49% to start with. Size can be 51 because we're just going to go ahead and just add in the background sort of just coating. I call it a wash sometimes, but it's a bit too close to watercolor as such in terms of sort of the terminology, and it's not meant to be like that. So we're just going to make sure that this is bulked in. Now what this does is this guarantees that there's at least grey in any gaps that show. And then when we go to erase later on, you've got sort of, you'll be able to reveal white, which is the background colour, of course. So this just gives you that. Now one thing we're then going to do is we're going to set up our smudge tool. So you want to go to the smudge tool, tap on the smudge tool, and you want under airbrushing, the soft blend. I have got the opacity set to 44%. Now, just for the background, we'll set it to 16%. Now, watch this. If I go back to my brush, so I'm just adding in charcoal, and then if I want to smudge, like in real life, I am currently smudging. You can see how it's starting to get a little bit fuzzier towards the outside edges. And to do that, it's really cool. Go up to your actions, go to the option of preferences. You want to go to the option of gesture controls, smudge, and turn on smudge with touch. Just remember, obviously, you may want to turn this off in future potentially, or use this option here where you have to put another finger over here on the little square icon and smudge with a finger. But I've got it set to just the finger, so you get that natural kind of feeling of charcoal, and it's super quick and easy. It just jumps between the brush and the smudge super quick. It's just so much fun. So anyway, that's our background in. Let's go ahead and start working on here. Now, one thing it's really important to note, we are not going to copy this fish pixel for pixel. I want you to have fun with it using the charcoals. It's a reference. So we're just going to go ahead and turn the guide down. We don't need it sort of 100%. I'll drop it down to 16. And then above your little sort of grey tone here, create a second layer for a moment. We're going to go to our colors. I am going to go ahead and work in with this gray here. So it's the top of the third column. And of course, you still want to be on your brush. Now, just before we carry on, just tap on your smudge and make sure that you then just change it here now to something a bit smaller, like 4% on the size, just so that when you go to the smudge now, it's a tiny little circle rather than something massive. You only had the large size for the background. So again, make sure you're on your brush. We're going to set your brush to, I think we could go ahead and probably find like an in-between at the minute, like a 12 to 10%, something like that. And we're going to start adding in all the color. Now, this, as I've sort of done in my previous tutorials, goes through a bit of an ugly stage, and you just got to work through it. So just trust me through the process of it. So we're just going to go ahead and basically the majority of this fish, as you can see from the black and white version, which I've edited to emphasize the darker tones and the lighter tones, is very, very dark. Like there's lots of grays in there. So the first part of this exercise somewhat is kind of coloring in. I'm going to bring the size down to 4% so I can be kind of sharp towards the exterior edges. Don't worry if you run sort of slightly beyond my sort of guide here, which it's just basically a trace just to get you sort of set up, so you don't need to worry about locations and stuff like that. With this particular type of tutorial, I'm not fussed about the fact that we've got the guide. The exercise is the charcoal, using the charcoal in different ways. Now, as we're sort of doing this, I want you to look though, for example, at like the fins. You've got all this line work in here. So as you go, just try and make sure your brush strokes follow suit with that, because then if you get any little gaps in between your charcoal texture here, it's following suit. You're going to slowly start to indicate necessarily where everything is and what flow it all goes in, you know, what direction the charcoal goes in determines what the fin looks like. If I did this kind of in a vertical way like this, it would look completely different. So just try and sort of make sure that you're looking at your reference, you're zooming in where you can or need to, and then just making sure your brush strokes just follow suit a little bit. Now, in this particular sort of graying phase, you're best off, to be honest, knowing that the fish is obviously quite grey here. You're looking really for the lightest areas at this point, because you do need to get a lot of grey in here. So for example, top of the head here, and then you've got the back area there as well, little sort of highlight tones on the body. So the majority of this is going to get a lot of colour, a lot of grey tone. Greys are really helpful. They just allow us to have something to work in later on. So again, we're just going to take a look at the fin. I can see all the directional kind of pivoting out from here. Unlike Nemo, this fish has two fins, two full-sized fins. I'm going to bring the size down to 2%, and that's only because I want to make sure that the sort of edge of some of these shapes here, such as the edge of the fin here, has some good solid direction to it. And don't worry about sort of packing in the color, like really go for it. We're going to really add in a good amount of gray. It's just a matter of trying to get the gray in, but with a few directional lines. Then let's take a look here. I'm going to go back up to 4%. Over here, it's very, very dark. So we're just going to pack in the gray. So with mine and my sort of tutorial here, we're going to go through 3 stages of sort of darkening, where we end up ultimately with black before we then end up with adding in all the highlights. So at this stage, it's just a matter of sort of building up all the color and the variation, and then seeing where we can go from there. So I'm just going to get the eye in, and there's certain things I am focusing on. I could, you know, easily just kind of just chuck it all in and just not even think about it too much in terms of just like, you know, just color block the whole thing in. But I am trying to make sure that certain elements that I know are very dark at least have a good amount of gray, just in case. So we're going to follow the body round here. And then I can see all the lines in there. You can see that there's some flowing sort of scales here, which of course later on we're gonna emphasize. I'm just going to bring that back out. And there's a couple of other areas, such as on the top of the fin that runs along the spine area. That's going to need some directional kind of lining in there. And you can see also I'm going to leave some gaps like white speckle. It's not too much of a big deal. In this little gap here at the base of the tail, this gets a little bit of color too. And then come across into the tail. So at the tail end, we can see we've got all of this directional lining. So we want to go ahead and just at least make sure, again, your lines are kind of flowing at least in that kind of idea, or that direction. Sometimes it's easier to start on the outside, sometimes it's easier to start on the inside and just sort of chuck those lines out from there. You do whatever's more comfortable to you. There's no right or wrong way of doing this. And don't worry about leaving the white tones, because again, if you've done my duckling charcoal tutorial here on YouTube, you'll know the process that obviously towards the end is where we really start to detail, and that's with the eraser, and we reveal the background. So at this stage, you've got no stress about sort of leaving in details. We're only going to get darker, and it does go through that kind of ugly phase. It really does. And it's even one that sort of an ugly phase that I somewhat look at and go, geez, really? Is this where we're going? Is this actually going to get anywhere? But it does get there. So we just want to look now up here as well. I want to go ahead and just make sure that that line is nice and solid into here, because it kind of flows up and across, gives you that nice sort of curl at the top here. Get those directional lines in, just in case the grey tones will be revealed. You can go right up to the edge, down into here, and then just sort of bring that little bit of grey round here at the base. So I know at this point it really does look like we've just chucked in everything, but it's just getting ready. So the other thing I recommend is we do have a lot of kind of softness to here, so I do want to make sure we are smudging where possible. So I'm just going to give this a light kind of smudge in here, softening up. And then I'm also making sure when I do smudge, especially on the fins, it's directional. I'm going in the direction of those fins. So following the lines of all the flow of the hairs. You can move your photo off on the side there if you need to, remind yourself. This is not the first time I've drawn this particular design, so I've got a little bit of an idea. But I'm just smudging in the direction just to soften it as well, get those charcoals nice and soft. And then the final bit I need to do is just back here. Right, I just need to add in the rear of the tail as well. Please let me know in the comments as well what you think of these charcoal tutorials. At the minute, I am really enjoying them. I've actually mentioned it on our sketch wave that I'm really enjoying the sort of romantic kind of look of it, of that it's just black, white and greys. And it's very fun to make, and I hope you're enjoying it. Sort of nodding as well towards sort of realism, not realism, but a little bit of realism, but also more traditional concepts as well with the charcoal. Okay, cool. Let's just make sure that this area here, because this is quite dark in here, so you do want to make sure that there's like a good amount of grey before we get into some of the darker tones. Awesome. So, of course, there we are. You can see a little bit of the kind of flow of how it's going to go in terms of the darker tones. So we're going to go ahead and move into some of those dark tones. So I'm going to go to my colours. I'm going to grab the bottom left of the palette. And of course, same brush, we can carry on. As always, if you need to, my advice is that you could swipe that to the left if you wanted to and tap on the bottom one and call it BU, which is backup, and then just turn it off. So if you do really sort of mess this next one up, you can at least go back and start this sort of level of colour again. But that's just a tip based on what I tend to do in my own sort of time when I'm drawing for myself. So let's go ahead and start darkening up now. So we are starting to look now at certain areas. So let's start in the bottom left. We've got a good amount of darkness here. It's almost completely black. So we do need to zoom in. We're going to take a look at the guide and just make sure we get tucked up under here. Doesn't need to be perfect at this stage. We are not detailing yet. That's not what you need to stress about. We just want to make sure that you can see there that shadow line comes sort of down the face, kind of runs across there. So you can put in like a light little line there and then just get in, start chucking some colour in. And then we are looking for certain aspects though. For example, there's a big dark line here that separates the top. So let's bring that down to say like a 2%, if not smaller. It's totally up to you how small you want to go. You can tip your pen down and it gives you far more of a sharper point on there. So I just want to make sure I'm just getting a general sort of darkening in there. And then we are going to follow suit again with the grey. Go right up towards the edges though. Don't leave them barren. And you have to add in a little bit more than what you see in the photograph based off of just the stages that I'm going to sort of take you through. Because if you have the grey in there and a larger amount, when you come to do the highlights, you've got that contrast to be starting to work with. But you can see the general kind of concept here of how close we want to kind of be getting to details to a degree. So let's go ahead and then move across. Let's move across to the other fin as well while we're working on that same sort of logic. So I'm just going to work in here and then take a look. And I'm constantly just scanning across. And as I'm doing that and I'm drawing, I'm not then focusing too heavy on where I'm putting the color over here, because again, you do not need to match that photograph pixel for pixel, not in the slightest. That's not something I would ever want to kind of put you through, and nor you should ever put yourself through, because you don't need to do that, especially from a reference. You know, every fish is going to look slightly different. All of our fishes are going to look slightly different to each other. That's perfectly fine and normal. Very, very normal. You should never put too much pressure on yourself like that. I'm just going to add in a little bit more grey on that top. I know it's actually technically lighter than that, and that's fine, but you want to have that little bit of darkness again to be working off later on. I am just going to try and get right on the ends here and sort of add in a few more lines that are a bit more purposeful. I'm pushing like downwards with my pen at this point, and I am getting a little bit kind of detailed to a degree. And every time you see some of these shapes here, look at the kind of sort of ripple here on the edge and the grooves that come off of it. So every time there's like a kind of ripple here, you can sort of darken up into the gap there. And then let's try and point that down into this area here. So a lot of this will come down to sort of yourself and taking a look at this, and you know, I'm guiding you through the processes, but a lot of this will come down to yourself of just making sure you take a look at what you're seeing and then applying it to your canvas. So I'm just going to emphasize dark areas. And again, as long as you're just sort of following suit with the kind of flow and the ripple of the kind of fin there, you're all good. Let's then start to move in towards that sort of area here where we can see the darkness goes up the fin and then around this curve line. And of course, I've already marked that out for you. We've got the curve here at the face, which is this line here, and the curve of this extra area a little bit further back, which is that one there. So you know in between there, it's just almost completely black. So I can just do exactly that. I can just punch in the color here in between there, wrap that underneath. Let's just zoom out a little bit more just so we can see. Now, we do need to sort of darken up here a little bit, because later on when we get to the detailing, you can always bring out these colors a bit more as well. You know, you can add highlight, and you can, you know, equally you can go backwards and forwards with this particular style where you can add more darkness later on in detailing. You can also add highlights. So yeah, it will look quite fuzzy almost, especially towards the latter stages. So I'm just getting in here. I don't need to sort of, it's quite dark in there. The only thing I'm trying to do is just leave a little bit of a nod towards the lips there. And again, I can take whatever artistic liberties I like here. So the first thing to do is just triple check we get all the marking in. There's like a curvy line here. You can see it on your guide. As long as you get that in as well, you're good. And then there's like a little bit of a curve there. So you can just try and sort of patch that in a tiny bit. And then here, it is a light tone technically, based off the coloured version of the photograph, but it's actually quite grey. And that's where sometimes making a photo of a coloured object dark and grey is actually a bit sort of not necessarily the best thing to always do. You should have both on hand so that you can just see the difference. I'm just smudging there, and I'm going to bring my smudge tool a little bit smaller to a 2% just in case, because I don't want to smudge things I shouldn't be. The eye on the outside edge over here can just get darkened up quite a bit. Just going to make sure that that is dark. It's very dark and kind of connects in. And again, it doesn't matter if it looks slightly different. Let's get that grey under here in as well. So I'm just going to give myself a light little bit of charcoal under here in that gap as well. Nice and light. And then I'm just going to get smudging. Get smudging. And the soft tones towards the end against the fine sharp edges will look really cool. Let's just darken up over here a little bit more. It is even darker than I have made it. So I'm just darkening here. Constantly looking. And then I think I could somewhat get away with darkening this up even more because we do have one more darker tone to introduce. So, you know, we will get even darker on this fin, for example. The eye, we're just going to block that in completely. You may need to go up and down with your brush, adding in a couple of layers of it. Let's then work over here because I know this is a dark tone here as it wraps to the underside. So we can go ahead and draw right up towards the fin. You don't want to get on top of it, so just draw up right against it into this corner here, and that also then helps bring the fin in front, making it very obvious to the person looking at this, you know, layering, natural layering of all the colour in the fish's body. So just bringing that up here, and then we're looking here and you can see that there's these kind of, obviously the scales, but these kind of curved lines. So I'm just going to kind of, again, just quickly get them in and follow suit with the angles so that, again, you're kind of laying out the blueprints. I love that phrase and I really mean it every time. You are laying in the blueprint for the whole of your design. It's the best way to think about it. You just, as you make your way, especially through all of these kind of layers here, you're just allowing yourself to set out where the rest of it is, where the blueprint should be for how the scales flow and everything like that. See, it's a bit darker here on the edge of the mouth as well, so I'm just going to sort of darken that up, darken this up too. It darkens into the corner of the eye here as well, so I will just kind of darken up there without sort of destroying the eye too much, and you can get underneath the eye and darken that there too. There's a little bit of a darker patch here, and then a little bit over there too. So I'm just generalizing. What I typically actually do, and I'm not sure if other people do this as well, is that I blur my eyes a lot of the time to blur that. So I don't focus on details. I'm just focusing on generalized sort of shapes. Now it's a little bit lighter there, so I will go ahead and just try and leave the edge of the face. And it's actually white, I believe. So I'm just smudging a little bit here to just soften the tone. But again, we've got light tones to add later, so it's perfectly fine for a minute. It's going to smudge outwards from kind of, it's not a nose, is it? But the front of the face outwards. You can smudge in directions as well, just to keep the kind of angles. Let's darken up here because it's very dark. Now I know that's a white edge, but I do want to have a dark edge as well at the same time. So I'm gonna darken up that kind of triangular shape that equally then runs up the top here. And it just runs up to around about, say, there, here. And then there's like a gap, a little bit of, I know it's white, we'll tackle that when we come to do the details. And then at the back here, we're gonna, again, in a similar way, just following suit with the flow. I'm not gonna draw out all of those lines because I don't need to. Not at this stage. I'm gonna draw lines that give a nod to it, but I don't need to draw every single kind of epic little bit of detail in there. And then I'm just darkening up here because you see it just gets a little bit darker, likewise a little bit darker towards the bottom of this kind of rear spinal kind of fin-like shape. I never know what the definition or the name of this area would be on the back there. I probably do, but it just never comes to mind. Then taking a look, we are going to go ahead and just see how it wraps, and there's a little bit of darkness there, so it comes down. And then there's like a little bit of a gap, and it kind of just goes backwards a little bit here. There's a little bit of grey under there too. And you end up with this light patch. Not necessary to actually implement it necessarily at this stage. And then I'm just following suit again in the directional line. You can see all the kind of scales and how they flow. It's super dark in here, which of course I've outlined for you in the guide anyway. That comes all the way down, and you're defining again another edge. You're defining the sort of belly over here, and then it kind of greys out from there, doesn't it? Spirals out in grey, and then it kind of comes back over like this. And then let's get some grey on the top of the head here too. And these ones are a little bit kind of curvy lines, so I'm not going that way with my brush strokes. I'm curving this way to, you know, show little bits of kind of detail almost. There we go. That's looking good. And yes, as I said, it may look a little bit darker at this current stage, but that's what's part of the process, you know. And then I'm going to smudge with some kind of curved motions in here. I'm going to smudge that down a little bit as well. And then here, I'll smudge backwards, following suit, trying to kind of get some of those scale lines almost in here as well. And then following the direction of everything. You know, I can smudge out the bottom of here as it makes its way in towards the body. I can smudge out here in a fanned kind of direction. And then here I could probably do a little bit of smudging. That's looking good. Let's move across into the actual fin area. Very straightforward when you look at it. There's this kind of dark shape here. Again, as long as I'm making sure I'm following the right direction of everything, you are perfectly good to go, just to get that in. Another very dark and obvious item is just up here, which is separating the two parts of the tail. So you want to make sure you get that in as well. So you get that nice separation between the rear and the front edge. And that kind of just runs, and I can emphasize it if I want to. Again, you have full artistic reign to do whatever you like. You don't need to worry about it too much. Get that down into there. And then here, obviously, again, we've got all of these lines. So you can start to kind of run lines that are getting darker, because in between the light tones, you've got dark streaks in there too. So when we add the light streaks, you want that darkness to be able to sort of work off against. So you end up making the whole design slightly darker, and then you just pump in the highlights towards the end. And if you end up adding too much of a dark tone as well, equally not a problem. Again, you just erase it later. Some nice dark tone. Now, even though this edge is nice and white here, I am going to go right to the edge with the dark tone, because again, when I get to the detail stage, there's a point in which I actually sort of switch off from the photograph. And I say, right, well, what do I want to emphasize? What do I want to now make pretty? You only kind of use the photograph to a certain point and then say, right, that's it. Now let me add some flair to this. Let me add some style. Let me add some just interesting artistic, expression, but also like liberties, and do what you want. You don't have to follow suit fully. So already at this stage, you should be able to start seeing some of these kind of elements in play. And I'm going to smudge again in a similar way in the direction of the tail, because we don't want too much detail here, because when again you add those lovely sharp elements of your details towards the end, you want to make sure the details stand off, so they've got some nice smudged elements underneath them to make them look even sharper and more cool and detailed. This area here, just kind of smudge that together, to be honest. Just, wouldn't stress about it too much. Come down here, smudging that together, and then I'm going to smudge as well up here, just making sure that that gets some attention. And I might even do a little bit of smudging on here, on these little fins that I didn't do quite so much of, just to soften them a little bit. And around the face, that's fine for now. Smudge there, blend a few areas together. But we are in a bit of an ugly stage, aren't we? The fish is there, its details are there to a degree, or the elements of it. And now it's just a matter of refining as we go. So I'm just going to darken up this area here just a tiny bit. It looks like he's got too much of a brow, and we don't obviously want that. So with that done, we can then go ahead and start to move in to the next stage of darkening. Again, feel free to swipe this to the left, duplicate it, tap on it, rename one of them BU for backup and turn it off, and then just drag it into your stack. You can even swipe from left to right on the backups and just put them in a group and call it BU, and turn it off and collapse it down so it's nice and tidy, and move it maybe all the way to the very bottom so it's, again, nice and organized. So making sure you're on, obviously, your fish layer. We're going to go to our colors. We're just going to go straight in now towards the dark tone, top left of the palette. I do have other grays in here, but based on my decisions, I always like to go for the sort of darkest tones if possible. So top left to make it more dramatic. Same brush, same everything. And then just kind of start in the same order, because then maybe certain things will come to mind of what you need to do. We've got that kind of triangular shape here, where we've got this very, very dark patch underneath the face. And we want to make sure we keep that line nice and clear and obvious that it is underneath the face. So it's not looking like the fin drags in front. You don't want that look at all. So I'm really going to darken up under here. Be bold with your shadows. Let's zoom in on the fin there so we can keep it in shot a little bit more. Dark tone here for that little gap. And then of course you've got lots of dark lines. So push your pen in a bit of a downward angle and you can start to kind of streak in with far more precision and specific kind of detailing. Get all the way in there and just create those brush strokes in those angles. Looking at your photograph, you can see again some areas my line work might be a little bit chunkier, and that's again so we've got that highlight sort of base ready to go for later. We've got an area where we can add those highlights in and they look really nice. And contrast is key with this. Contrast is key. Just going to smudge a tiny bit at this early stage just to blend out the shadow on the underside of the fish there. Lovely. That's much better. And then you can make sure that these sharp areas of detail, they still look nice and sharp. A little bit under there too. A couple more brush strokes. From there, you can then go ahead and say, well, let's move to the other fin. That's kind of the order we did it in before. Lovely big dark patch here. Scribble that in. Quick as you like, quick and simple. We're looking for dark tones again, so the general sort of principles of the dark tones. There's a little something up there. And, my brush size is the smaller, so I do need to sort of somewhat keep trying to work in this kind of pointed down brush stroke in here. There's a nice dark line that runs through the middle. So most of the time you're using the photograph just as a sort of, obviously a reference, but and the term reference should be acknowledged of exactly that you're just using it to see, the body shape, the composition, and the sort of elements of the subject matter that you're drawing. It should not be used as a mirror as such. I'm going to, again, just darken up into there, and I might even smudge that back and into the body so it's nice and soft. Likewise, I'll smudge out this kind of area here, following kind of a little bit of those angles, but I do want to make sure there's a little bit of precision there. So I'll go back over it with a little bit more of the dark tone, getting nice and detailed, nice and sharp. Let's get underneath some of these again to add in those lovely kind of ripple effects. So lots and lots of streaks if you can manage it. You can spend even longer than I am on it because you've got complete spare time in terms of, you don't have to think about a YouTube duration. Whereas me, I'll get the majority in, to be honest. But in my own work, in my own time, I did spend a lot of time on this. From there, we're going to then take a look at just the neighboring area. So just behind it there, the body gets very dark. So we're going to darken up in here. Darken up, very, very dark in that. And get right behind the fin as well. Just give that nice separation. One thing you might need to start doing is also go to your guide. If you tap on it and invert it, it will now be white because we're now starting to get even darker. You may want to punch up the opacity so you can see all your line work against the dark tones. That may help quite a bit. And then we've got this area here, haven't we? Just in behind here. Let's make sure this is nice and sharp. A little bit underneath the body there as well. It's a little bit darker than it looks. Now I do need to sort of spread out the color there. I equally need to make sure that this area gets nice and close to that edge of the guide there. I'm going to just block it in with just complete darkness for a minute and get as sharp into that corner as possible. And then I can just start to sort of blend outwards. Again, I'm kind of trying to think about directional lining. I'm trying to follow suit with all these lovely curves of where the scales are, and just trying to be a bit more precise with my pen action, pointing a little bit further down. Again, I'm more than happy to darken up the very edge of the fish as well, like the outer edge, because I want to reveal that edge when it comes to detailing with the eraser. I'm just going to keep going up here with the shadow a little bit more. Again, just trying to get those curves in to follow. And you can just like actually purposely, make sure that they do sit there and get the angles right in where you want them, just to give yourself that guide immediately straight off the bat. Let's then move back into the face area. So the eye, it's just going to continue, just keep making its way through these phases because it just gets darker and darker. And then just it's when we get to the erasing that it starts to come back. We've got that dark tone here as it kind of curves in here. There's a little bit of darkness there. It does darken up underneath the eye a little bit. And sometimes you may want to turn off your guide as well, just to see, you know, and triple check everything is as it should be. So I'm just emphasizing that kind of triangular shape in there. There's a little bit of kind of color just off the rear. And I'm going to just bring in an additional bit of shadow just up here. I'm not quite finished with that area yet. Let's bring in the guide again, just so we can see. And also likewise, you can see mine as well. Of course, we've got the mouth area nice and dark. So this one's a little bit longer than my duckling because also the actual goldfish or the fish itself has so much more detail to it, to be honest, and there's so many more tones in there that we actually will probably have to factor in quite a lot more than we did with the duckling. So this might be the different subject matters are also going to always have different variations to them, you know, different factors to accommodate for, and the goldfish is just one that it has quite a lot of detail. Now, equally in this one, I'm going to do some slightly different things towards the end. And I also like to do that with all of my tutorials, that, you know, you should always maybe think, yes, even though I'm doing charcoal, I'm just smudging here, by the way. Even though I'm doing charcoal, I can always try and maybe change it up by adding something new maybe every single time, just to try and make sure, you know, you see what else fits a little bit more as well. A little bit of darkness under there, a little bit more detail maybe with the charcoal. The charcoal brush can look as if it is detailing quite a lot for you. I'm just darkening up around here. You can see all these kind of grayish tones there. I just need to follow suit with the markings a bit more because I've not done that quite that much. A little bit of grey there. Smudge that out a tiny bit as well. Just a little. Add in a bit more dark tone there and smudge that out. A little bit up here as it kind of rolls around onto the top of the head. I'm going to kind of curve in that shape and give it a little quick smudge. A little bit of darkness. Let's just triple check this edge of the face. Now that is super light and it's going to probably remain nice and light, so you don't need to sort of damage that too much. You could probably leave it as it is. Above the eye though, there's this kind of like scale shape here. You can see this kind of line that wraps around over the top of the brow, so you can kind of just patch that in and smudge if you need to, if you haven't already. And then you're looking for the kind of curve shapes here across the top of the head and kind of follow in suit to say, oh, where's all the lining? They're all quite horizontal, aren't they? And then you've got all of these little curves beyond this groove of the guide up here. You've got all these small, very dense little scales in here. And also there's a bit of a dark tone just back here as well. And we just want to make sure we get the rounding of objects as well. So the rounding of like the top of the head here, you can emphasize it, you can smudge it. Like so. And again, little sort of curved shapes in here. Horizontal lines. Don't worry if you add in a slightly darker patch as well. By doing so, you may end up actually making it look better than the photograph. The photograph has got this kind of, you know, underwater, of course, element to it where the colors are a little bit sort of more hazy. And if you obviously took the fish out, it may even look slightly sharper as well. So you can start to, you know, emphasize where you think you want to. Getting this little streak line here into play a little bit more. So I can just bring that line there, and then it runs up the rear there of this spinal fin, I'm going to call it, for the rest of the tutorial, spinal fin area. Just going to run a dark tone along there, because again, I can bring it back out in a minute when I get into the highlights. Underneath of this kind of curved flick Mohican here, let's just refer to it as the Mohican. There we go. All of the line work, just like before, we want to get some dark lines in here that are a little bit sharper, pointing down. Try to go right to the edge as well of the Mohican and add in all of those shapes in there, all of the grooves and the lines. And then just make sure towards the base, you can see there's a dark ribbon almost in there. Again, we're going to emphasize more than we want to or should do necessarily. We'll bring it all back out later. Then as it goes round here, it curves round, doesn't it? And then you end up with this kind of dark tone here. And then that kind of flows off. You end up with a little grey tone in there too. Again, we want it darker than what it appears. So, go for it. Let's go ahead and just darken up in this little groove as well. So down here, I'm going to go right round into that corner, darkening that up and then curving it round. And if you end up with a big dark blob like this, just smudge it. It's much, much nicer to smudge it and then see if you can detail on top of it. It will make life a lot sort of easier for you to blend it out, soften it up as well. I'm going to just blend out some of these lines while I'm at it. Just making sure they're a little bit softer here as well. Going in the same direction that I've drawn everything in. And if I need to, I can always get back in here and darken these up again. Curved lines. Just chucking in some color. Getting it nice and curved. Let's triple check back here. So I think I can go ahead, even though it's quite light, I want to just go ahead and add in some more directional lines, I think. Just a few more to bring that out. And then in here, let's go ahead and really add in some quite random, chunkier, darker lines, just to add in some more character, I think. Let's look at the tail. We've got this bright spot here, of course, so you kind of want to leave that. And let's just get the tail in here. It's a big, dark shape here, curves up. And we'll just follow suit. There's a nice little dark triangle shape there on the end up here, and then run those lines in. Run those lines in. We've got a dark line in behind here too. Of course, separating the two sides of the tail into here. And let's go ahead and start pushing down a little bit more with our pen, seeing if we can get some of those lovely fine edges up here in the tail. Let's move this photograph across a tiny bit because you can see how that darkness does go right to the very end. And again, we're just focusing on adding in darker lines. Then we need to, a little bit of darkness here just to sort of engage these two areas together. You can smudge, of course, get that nice directional smudging in there just to see if you can soften up a few of those lines, which will make them look even better later on. Smudging it out. You don't want too many sort of ultra dark patches. You want them to be a little bit softer. Softening up in the body there as well. Just following the curve. You can see me just literally just watching the lines, and then I'll get in there and add in even more dark tone on top. So you end up with a nice soft layer, but then also some areas of quite interesting, sharp details. Let's go right along here. You can see how they all start to just whip out from here. Lovely. That's looking nice and dark. We've got all of the kind of characteristics of everything in there now in terms of where all the darkest tones are. And it's just a matter then of just triple checking you've not missed anything, seeing if you could maybe emphasize. A little tip if you feel like it's maybe looking too light, maybe your pressure was a little bit too light, you can always swipe it to the left and duplicate it. And sometimes it just makes it a tiny bit darker, or even chunks up the edge a little bit more as well. And then you just pinch those two together. I'll just do exactly that. It didn't make too much of a difference. Now, based off what I do with this particular charcoal style, it's now a matter of getting in here and adding in some background color. So again, I urge you swipe it to the left and duplicate it, drag one of them into your backup group, so you've got it, and then continue on a new one. You then want to go ahead, we'll just keep black for a minute because I don't want you to have to do twice as much work. But sometimes, for example, in like the duckling one, I grabbed, for instance, the top of the second column and would grey in here. I urge you to probably just do the black tones around the edge first. So we'll do exactly that. We'll do black tones all the way around the edge. Now, there's something to be said potentially as an argument that, well, could you go ahead and create a new layer underneath and then just simply darken up like here? Yes, you could do that, and it's so much quicker to do it. However, there is an argument potentially to say whether or not if you haven't done a solid enough job of your fish and making it nice and solid, you'll end up with quite fuzzy lines to it. So try that, like I've just done. I've created a new layer underneath the goldfish, and I'm just darkening up because we're creating background color at this point. However, in a minute, I'm going to merge them together and overlap some of these colors. Now, what I was starting to say is that if I go to 4% on the brush size, my style with this charcoal is to make sure that the background is nice and dark so that when we add edge elements, edge bits of color here, the actual fish will be able to pop against the dark tone. So I like to have like a really, really dark tone in there. I'm just making sure I go right around the edge because in a minute we're going to smudge it and blend it with some gray. It's just making sure that the backdrop now has some more color. So a little bit like that. We'll bring the size up to like a 15% and just widen it ever so slightly. Don't go too mad just yet. So a little bit wider. And then we'll grab the gray, so the top of the second column, and then we will just smudge we'll draw in right up against it prior to smudging. And this will give us that lovely background we want. Make this brush size a bit bigger, 36% here, just to get some gray that kind of gives you that bit of a rectangular shape. And don't worry if you go you don't want to go too close to the edges, but if you do, I'll show you how to fix it in a second. Grab the dark tone again, the black, and then just smudge in or blend in some random patches of dark tone. You don't want it just to look like a border almost. You kind of want to blend these two tones together, and you can bring the color a little bit further down if you want to for some artistic kind of flaring to the canvas. And then grab your smudge. I've gone to the smudge tool, this time, because I want to set the size to something larger at 16%. You don't always have to use your finger if you don't want to. You can, of course, just use the smudge tool. And I'm going to undo that because I need to make sure I smudge these dark tones across and onto the gray. We still want to make sure that the fish itself has that nice dark tone in behind it. So I'm just going to push across. And if you end up with something that looks a little bit too sort of gray and not dark, just go back in, grab your brush, make sure it's black again, get that color in there. So this is where the tutorial slightly differs from my previous duckling one, because on the duckling one, we actually outlined it on the same layer and then done gray first and then black on top and smudged them together. And neither's right or wrong. It's just another way of doing it. And this is where when you do a particular style repetitively, you will slowly start to build up different things that you can do to change it, change a different part of it each individual time you do it. So with something like this, I'm then going to go ahead and merge the two together. So that's all on one layer now. Future Joel here. Make sure you actually also merge layer 2 there to your fish design as well. So your light grey background is merged with the charcoal work you've done of your fish up till now. I actually forget to do this in the tutorial, but you should do it in yours and it will make those highlights later on pop even more. Silly Joel. I'm going to bring my brush size down to around about, say, 8%. And I know that the lighting I want up here and it's going to come across and cast onto here. You can see that already with these dark tones, which means some of these whiter edges we actually need to get rid of. So if you go down to like a 4%, you can just get really close. Now make sure you turn off your guide as well, because that could be a distraction potentially. I just want to soften up and darken up the edges. So when I say soften up, I don't mean that necessarily. If anything, it'd be hardening the edge. I want to blend some dark tone on top of some of those edges because the contrast will look amazing. I'm going to darken up on top of the fin here. Get into this groove. You don't want, and this is somewhat why we didn't do this previously, because we have to look at the fish now and say, well, the fin almost completely blends in with the background here and there's no white edge to it. So I need to get in here and blend in some dark tone over that edge to get rid of that kind of whitish tone to it. Likewise here underneath. Yes, I can reintroduce it in a moment if I feel like I want to take that artistic flair and do it. But I also want to have part of the fish blend into just the background. Just have it sort of nicely fade out. You don't want super sharp white edges everywhere. I'll get rid of here, for example, where the belly goes into just like the darkest tones. underneath there too. The underside of the fin, the tail, we'll just lightly add in a bit of darkness on there. We can bring it back out in a second. Don't worry if you feel like you're destroying too much. I'm just going to go over the edge a little bit, getting rid of some of those tones. So this is where maybe, again, if you'd done it on the same layer, you wouldn't have this sort of two-step, but either way, you'd have still have to do the same amount of work either way. Now I'm going to just break this down a little bit. And some people may actually like it exactly how it was. And to be honest, like it would still actually completely work as it was. But for me, I want to show the darkest areas of this and let them just fade into certain areas. But it will equally tell you if you've done a good enough job of making sure you've got your highlights and shadows. So with that done, we then want to go ahead and move into the detailing phase of this. So that is erasing. So again, you may want to swipe this to the left and duplicate it, drag it into your backup folders. You can go back, and on this layer, you're simply erasing from it. Now your eraser, you need to tap on it. You want to be airbrushing in the medium brush. I will vary my brush opacity from 20, sometimes up to 70. Size wants to be fairly small because we are detailing, remember. So we're going to go ahead and going to do it in the same sort of order, so I'm not sort of jumping around too much. Look at the fin, look at the details of it now. I've got all these lovely streaks in here. So you may need to go down to like a 1%. And again, I've got the opacity set to 20. And I'm going to get in there and just start drawing in with a very fun, freeing kind of approach to it where it's got a little bit of a kind of scribbly nature to it. I don't want you to sort of go too mad with having to really focus in. Feel free to vary your opacity from time to time as well. Go to like a 50 and get some interesting additional levels of highlight tone and like a few little areas there where you can see the brightest spots. For example, maybe there's like a few little parts of the fin here, they get a little bit more love. Now I can go all the way to the very end of the fin as well. But just adding in some areas there that are a little bit brighter, which will give you far more contrast and far more pretty look to it overall. That's going to go all the way into there. And then we're going to try and get some of the streaks in there. Vary your opacity, go to like a 30 as well, so it's in between. And vary your size as well. You can go a bit bigger. You don't need to be too heavily sort of fine tuning at this stage. You can always make your way back through your design bit by bit. So I'm going to move across. I'm going to move across to the other fin. Move our photograph across as well. Nice and bright across the top. And as it curves in, it nicely fades in. So I want to go ahead and, first of all, make sure this is nice and bright across here. And I might make the brush size a tiny bit bigger. I don't want to have too many sort of fine brush strokes at the beginning, because then, of course, we can go ahead and just refine with some sharp details. So we're just going to keep erasing through here, creating some lovely fin lines. There's a couple that kind of go a bit of a sort of diagonal line down here at the bottom, which is nice. It gives a little bit more contrast in that area. But there's equally that quite nice larger one there. So we're just going to keep going, refining, detailing. Get right up to the edge as well. That's where you want to be. You want to make sure that you can see some of those fin lines go right into the very edge. I'm going to change my size now. Just go down a little bit smaller just so I've got some variation in my line work here. So they don't all look too consistent because none of those gaps are the same. Some of those gaps don't even go to the end. They just run down into like that dark patch and that's it. Down here at the bottom, there's quite a lot of detail to be adding in, to be honest. There's like this kind of fanned out kind of effect from here. And then we're just erasing on top. Get really, really light in the dark area. Don't add in too much. But there's a good amount of kind of flaring out from there. And then so do some small lines and then go to like a slightly larger brush size and then go over the top of those. And you'll just sort of exaggerate that area a bit more. Widen it up. Lovely. That's quite nice. Now, one thing that's really important to just note, and this is obviously for later as well, looking at the goldfish here, there is actually white detailing on these edges here. So towards the latter stages, I'm just going to erase where the white is and add some extra kind of whitening to those areas. For now, we will just carry on with detailing highlights and shadows, but that's something we will factor in. Likewise in the face as well. So the face, you can see, first of all, we need to sharpen up this eye. So let's get into the eye because over the top of it, we've got this lovely little curve shape to it. Go to 20%, take your time to build up these elements. So I'm going to go over the top, build up the kind of the bulge at the top of the eye here that goes into there. And then it comes down quite close to the eye. There's also then like this extra detail here of sort, and then another kind of detail there too. And I'll lightly just kind of just chuck them in. Just chuck them in, see what happens. And then so we need to go ahead and go round the eye at the far end just a little bit, just to kind of separate it a tiny bit from the tones underneath. I'm going to bring the brush size down a tiny bit more because I want to focus on this here first. So I need to turn on my guide again because it will give you an indication as to where that is, and make sure you're on your layer obviously of your fish. You kind of just want to curve in this shape here. We've got this lovely little triangular shape at the bottom of the eye in here. So just a triangle with a little sort of wiggle further down below it. And then you sort of do a very, very faint line there and then leave a bit of a gap and then add in this kind of additional curving shape here. So you're just going to need to take a look at the eye. The eye is going to be quite critical to sort of nail because it will give you so much detail and a sort of focal point almost as well, and show that, you know, we really did take the detail to a sharp level. So you kind of want to get in there and follow all of the kind of elements in there, wrap around that edge. There's a little bit of a kind of light patch here, so I can make my brush size a bit bigger just to get that in. It's a little bit of a light patch there that bleeds over from the very top, kind of wraps through here a little bit. And that's why we keep our brush opacity quite low and pressure. We just add in that area here. Again, it doesn't matter if you don't get it 100%, but zoom in all the way out, it should look super crispy now. That's what we want. We want that eye to really pop. Turn off your guide just to triple check, and then start continuing on with the detail. There's a little bit of a triangular shape underneath the eye there. And these elements are worth noting because they help detail this area far, far more. So they help sort of show all the different curves and features of the eye and the bulging of it and so on. So it's worth just noting what you can find there. That wraps round, as I said, around that area of the eye, and then it comes round. So it goes round and then flares out a little bit. So you can come around the edge of the eye and flare that out a tiny bit more. And because we are on detailing, you know, you can go very, very white tone if you want. You know, I wouldn't do it too quickly, build up the color if you can, but you can go very, very white, really show the lighting. And again, I want the lighting to come across into here. So if you equally are following suit with that philosophy, that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to just run that into there because it gets quite sharp here in behind there. Let's zoom out. We've got this kind of like squiggle-like shape here that goes just over here and kind of curves up. And you can see I'm drawing in with a quite fine-ish line there just to draw in this kind of squiggle here, up there. It's not accurate 100%. It doesn't need to be either. It's nice. Let's get this little bit of highlight here. You see this kind of triangular shape just underneath the eye. So let's go here, a little bit of a triangular highlight of sort in here. You can blend it out, take your time. Now, we are going to end up somewhat with much more defined brush strokes with this erasing stage. That's fine. It just adds to the styling of it, in my opinion. But yeah, just be aware that that is something that will be a factor. You know, you are going to see scribble lines, and I actually like it. I like the scribble lines. So under here, there's not really a lot going on. We're going to turn off our guide again. The only thing I will note is just in the corner of the mouth here, mine's far too bright. So I'm just going to go ahead and go back to my brush. And even though we are in the highlight stage, it's not to say you can't, you know, obviously add in some more color as you see it. Just make sure your smudge tool gets reverted back to the small size of 4%. So if you do end up smudging again, and you can jump between the two as much as you want, like the smudge tool, the brush tool, so on. For example, I am going to go back to my brush and just add in a little bit of that darkness here, where that little flick, make the brush size as small as I can, a little bit of a flick over here. There we go. It's a little bit more detailed. Go back to my eraser. I can see there just above the mouth here, I might have to just take away a little bit of color there. Leave a little bit of a patch. Over here, it does get quite faint, but artistic liberties may come in where I just go ahead and say, I'm gonna brighten up the very edge. That's all I want to do. Just for a minute, just brighten up the very edge. We're leaving the right side. The only addition though is up here, where it starts to bulge out again, like up here. You've got a little bit of a bright tone. So bring in your guide again if you need to, just to triple check where I've put everything. So you can see it actually bulges out here. And based on me adding in that dark tone over the top, I've lost it completely. So that's where we then bring in the eraser. We blend that in. There's a little kind of dash of some sort here as well. And then this area here just needs the lightest blend of color. And likewise the eye, the tiniest little bit of color on there. Zoom all the way out. Take a look at your work so far. Now, over here is where you're going to want to start to just get a bit fun with it. We're not going to draw in these lines just yet. The only thing you're going to do is kind of just draw in little dashes and curves, curve-like shapes here to just indicate scales. Just indicate a few simple scales for now. Back here, we will go ahead and just brighten up the very top corner there a bit more. Adding in a bit of color, and there's like this triangular shape just there as well. So just coloring in that. But everywhere else, you kind of just slowly start to create curved shapes. Just look at the angle of where how they flow outwards. They will kind of pivot out from the kind of center, of course, and just little curved shapes here. Layer them on, really build them up. We don't want to detail them just yet, and we're only not doing it just yet because there's so much more to do everywhere else that you can get in here afterwards and start to sort of really define edges even more. You'll notice here, I've just added in a bit of white tone here though, because it's a bit of a curved shape of sort. And then carrying on with what we just said. Now here, over here, we can go ahead and add in some of those scale lines as well. And they just want to be as simple as some curved lines, again, in a row, all the way towards the back, following the kind of curvature of the body of the fish. So just like scale lines like this. Not too heavy, and lower your opacity if you feel like you need to, but all of these tiny little sort of ribbon or curve-like shapes here, we'll just add in all of that little definition. Don't go into your shadows too much, just leave them, blend in if you need to. There, it's super bright here. So first of all, I am just going to emphasize that edge. I'm going to turn off my guide. I will flicker between it, but for now I want to brighten up this edge. It gets really bright all the way down the body, so I'm going to go ahead and just follow that a little bit more, and then I'll blend it across one brush stroke. Because of how the eraser works, you best kind of do it in like one big large brush stroke and then add in another level of erasing on top to emphasize it further. Curve shapes. Little curve shapes all the way around into there. Lovely. Zoom all the way out. You should start to see all that compression. I use the phrase compression because it's where you zoom all the way out, all that detail gets boom, shrunken down, far smaller, and you can just see the general area of color. Now here, we've got this like large sort of rowing of all of it. So I'm going to go ahead and just draw in like a few very faint lines here that are horizontal for the each and every sort of little scale here, just a few, and just showing again form and flow of the body and how they curve round a little bit towards the rear. But then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to try and be a bit braver, and with like a 2% here, just get like a little bit of a squiggle where I can see some of those flowing sort of curved bits of color and highlight. I'm going to just ripple in some highlight in there. So just a quick straight through, emphasizing this brighter patch on the side of the fish. Zoom all the way out, and then just keep emphasizing it if you can. Here, there's another bright patch that needs to be brought in. I've gone over that a few times and it's gone to white quite quickly. So that's something we are trying to avoid early doors. I'm going to go back here. I can see how it blends into some of here. So I'm going to take away some of those dark tones and just create like a gradient and a blend of color. And then we'll add in some more of this light tone over here. Don't take away too much, because we equally want to sort of add in quite fine, sharp details shortly. At the rear over here, I'm going to take a bit of an artistic liberty straight away and just add in a bit of a bright tone here, just here, followed by bringing that curved So that's where that highlight was. A little bit of a curved line, and then a little bit along there too. Just trying to bring out the shape and definition of the fish. Let's take a look here at the mohawk, as we've been calling it, or I have. We're going to go up here. I'm going to follow that all the way up to the top. So it gives us that nice separation based on lighting. I imagine, of course, it will be brighter towards the bottom as well. And you can curve that round, creating these little flicks here, like so. Blend into there. And then it has the main flick here, but then it also has it at the top, which I believe is actually white coloring. So we'll follow suit for a minute. We will go ahead and just try and match up to it a little bit more. So I'm going to bring that curve in right from the outer edge across like so, just to show that kind of flick over. And at the rear here, we've got all of these beautiful curve shapes in here. So you want to be at like a 1%, probably at 20% of your brush opacity, and get some more defining curve lines in here. A little bit more towards that top edge. You know, make sure you go all the way to the edge of the rear here, and then bring that brush size down 1%. Maybe even bring the opacity up to 50 so you can be a bit more defined, and just draw in some of those lines. Tuck underneath the flick over here, you know, show how the flick over overlaps in front of us. So a little something like that, and then go all the way to the top. Bringing that round. Zoom all the way out. And then obviously those ones are a bit more defined. So the alternative option then you can do is go back to your brush. Brush wants to be down to the smallest size it can go, and you just reintroduce dark streaks in there and see if you can then create that kind of rippled kind of continuous pattern almost that's through here. So I'm just going to go back through, and maybe I could go backwards and forwards, but to be honest, I'm going to leave it as it is, with the exception of going back to my eraser and just taking a bit more of an artistic liberty on the top edge. So I want to go along here, and sometimes they will look like scribbles, and I love that, if I'm honest. I love the kind of wiggle kind of lines that you can see in there. They look so free, they look so fun. And I'm just going to go along there, maybe slightly bigger brush size, just to get a bit of a brighter edge on the very, very top, where I imagine that lighting's coming across. We're going to move into the tail area here. So we are going to follow suit with the same sort of principles. Now, of course, towards the base of the tail, we've got this very bright highlight in here. It kind of goes up towards there, a little bit of a speck of sort. I'm going to bring the opacity down to 20% again, just so I can take my time building up the color. I don't like it when it starts to get away from me too quickly. It starts to get too bright too fast, and I like to be able to control it, decide where it goes. Obviously, we can also see here, while we're zoomed in, there's far more curve lines in here that make their way in. So we're going to try and add in a few more little lines here for all of the scales. Just rolling their way in. Don't have to do 100 and, thousands of them, just a few. Then there's a little bit of an indication of some sort of highlight edging here. That's fine, I'll just chuck that in. And then we want to flow those highlights all the way up. And the first thing I want to do is make sure that the very top edge of this front part of the tail is nice and bright. So even with a 20%, I can get in there and erase quite a few times. Get some nice streaks in here. Get some of those bright, more defined edges in there. At the same time, respect your shadows. Here in this area, there's not a lot going on, bar something coming off of the end here. So leave the shadows. We want that contrast. We want the differentiation between them. I'm going to go 50% and a slightly smaller 1% brush size, so I can get some nice clean edges in here. And especially up towards the top here, you can see how we've got these lovely kind of glowing effects. I'm not going to make you do that kind of line effect, although I could show you how you do that if you need to. But I'm going to go ahead and just keep adding in all of the pretty, more defined lines up here. And if you need to, just go to your brush and just run a line through them. Introduce the color again, but do very, very fine lines through them. And then you should end up with a closer attempt to that kind of effect. That's the way you can do it. You can spend a bit more time on it than I just did. Because again, we've got so much I want to get in here. Most importantly, I want to make sure, again, we go right up to the edge, and then on the very edge here, I want to show how the lighting is going to really emphasize the very edge of the tail and blend in. And if I very quickly just go back to the image, up here is actually white and goes all the way into here. So we will emphasize that shortly to just factor that in. So if you do add like a really bright edge here, don't stress about it, because in a minute you'll be able to sort of blend it in towards the end. We're gonna just do the same on the rear of the tail there with a little bit of a streak inwards and a flow of a few lines, but making sure they've got that nice separation. We will zoom out, we will move towards the bottom stage of the tail. So again, lines from the edge. I'm currently still at the 50%, so I'm being quite brave immediately, but I could probably do with dropping that down in a second and getting those extra tones in there of the 20%. You don't want everything to look the same. You want to have some highlights that really pop, like this one here is really popping, and then bring it down in size, bring it down in opacity, 20%, and go across it again. And, you know, emphasize it as well, maybe even blend it out. And just like before, we'll set the brush size a tiny bit bigger and back up to 50, where we just go along the edge. Make sure the very, very end of the tail has got some nice bright highlighting. Again, respecting the shadows though, so we don't need to flow into there too much. I'm going to go ahead and just brighten up the edge there, the very, very edge of the tail, showing a little bit of lighting. And already you should have something that looks so dramatic, especially in the face. Now, at this stage, the only thing I want to sort of abide by is the fact that the face has a little bit of white in it. So I'm going to go down to 20%. And if you turn on the guide, it will kind of loosely give you an idea where that is. So just underneath this kind of scribble line here and underneath the mouth, just very lightly with a size of 2% and an opacity of 20, just take away a bit more color here and then up here too, just to maybe show that this is white rather than orange. So just a little bit of just blatant, obvious differentiation between the two colors. We're equally going to go ahead then, and while we're working at this sort of idea, move across. The other thing you want to do is take a look, edge of the fins and a big sort of area here. So I'm going to go back and I'm just going to brighten up here. Bring the size down a little bit, and I'll just randomly sort of add in good chunks of white on the end there. I'll do the same over here. I've got an idea as to roughly how much it covered in my head from what I've just seen. So I don't need to go ahead and do too much, but I'm just making sure that there's like a good, like obvious amount in certain places, and also a good obvious amount of kind of variation and separation between like a gray area and the white area and the orange. You know, here there's a clear, obvious look. So here there's a clear and obvious kind of separation between the orange and white. And so going back to Procreate, you just want to go ahead and kind of make sure that the edge in those areas do have a little bit more color. Here in the face, I will just kind of scribble in a bit more white and add in like patches just to add in detail so it's not too much of a white area. The other areas was of course the tail. So moving across back to the photo, big large area here at the top. This is the exact sort of reasoning as to what I say about, you know, you don't need to match up to it perfectly. Get an idea, you know, you move across and then just get back in there with the eraser. Go a bit higher if you need to, like 40% if you feel like it's necessary, and just get some white patching on the ends of the tail. Let's go back to the photograph and take a quick look. It gets quite thin there and then goes around the edge and tucks underneath. So I'll go underneath, add in some white on the edge. And this is where, again, you want to keep it simple. Don't overthink it. Lovely. And you can always go ahead and go back in with your dark tones as well, should you feel it's necessary. I'm going to switch back one more time. Top here of the mohawk is a little bit kind of different tones. Now, in terms of black and white, it doesn't make too much of a difference, but we will abide by it a little bit more by just whitening up the very top edge. It's just as simple as that. Now let's just go ahead and just simply focus on just detailing. So you can go ahead and turn off your guide if you need to. you can then just take a look at a particular area, and the main area I want to focus on is the top of the head. I'm going to set my opacity to 50% and size down to 1, and I'm just going to try my best to just detail and not really think about it. You know, I can see obviously there, which is roughly around about here, there's some good additional detailing, but I just want to kind of show scales at this point. So I'm going to go slightly larger with the brush size. I just want to show sharp edges to some scales in here. I can take a look at the photograph though and see, of course, little elements like how they kind of flow from side to side and different areas here of lining. Now this area here does have a slight sort of whiter patch, so I will just kind of, let's just patch that in with some white tone, but again trying to do like horizontal curves to show like scales, etc. So you can just patch that in. I'll come down the face just a tiny bit to show patchiness, just a little bit, nothing too much. And then we'll just detail. We'll detail away. Small sizes, high opacity. When I say high, it's 50. I'm saving like a 70% potentially towards the end. So here, just little sort of scales just to show curve. Lots and lots of small little curves in here. And of course, they kind of make their way back across the actual body there as well. So all of those kind of curve lines that you created with the kind of white that I can see, those kind of lines there that flow, and get in there and get on top of them, get some smaller little scuffs and little scales in there. This is the problem, well, not a problem, but this is like what I was referring to earlier, where the subject matter will make a huge difference to like the detailing phases of all these types of things. You know, this particular subject matter today requires, you know, in certain areas to be a bit more detailed and a bit more focused and very kind of repetitive in that sense. Yes, the feathers were a bit repetitive with the duck, but the duck also had, you know, lots of freedom necessarily. In here, you do need to be quite precise and get some nice shaping in here. Then in certain areas where I know I've got the kind of brighter tones, I'm going to kind of emphasize them a bit more because I want that kind of shimmer of detail across the back. So this is where you start to sort of lose the photograph a little bit, because I know what I want to try and, you know, emphasize as I'm making my way further back. Even down here, a couple of little extra specks. I'm going to go ahead and make the brush size like a 1% and kind of wiggle my way through some of those scales to just, again, emphasize like a bit of a brighter highlight on there. Get a little bit of that shimmer running across. I do need to go ahead and, you know, brighten up here where there is a bit of a separation there between the kind of head and the side of the body, and based off the lighting direction, I would equally go ahead and just keep making that a bit brighter. That looks nice. I'm going to go ahead and actually be super brave and go to 80% and the brush size down to 1 and get in here and try and just sharpen up a few elements of the eye, just a few, just to kind of make it pop a little bit more. Now don't do everywhere, undo a few bits as well and see what fits, but a few little sort of sharper elements of white will look really nice. The mouth as well, by the way, we can go ahead and just try to emphasize it, because in the actual photograph, if we take a look at it, you can actually see that there is a mouth in here, and this is where black and grey gets rid of it slightly. So we will tuck underneath this kind of curve, these 3 bounces and a little bit of a mouth. So we'll go ahead and go back to Procreate. We'll zoom in, bring your guide back in if you need to, just for positioning, and then just get a little bit of a curve in here, a little bit of that, the top curve as well. And then underneath here, try and maybe emphasize a little bit that kind of shaping. Maybe a few little scuffs underneath that are a little bit brighter. Likewise, underneath, I'm going to go ahead and brighten up with a little bit of a flare underneath there. Turn off your guide, just see what it came out like. You may need to go ahead and get in there and just soften that up. So 20%, 1%, 20% opacity, 1% brush size, and just kind of soften out the mouth a tiny bit. Doesn't need to be perfect, but you're just bringing it out a little bit more. And by all means, go back to your brush if you feel like you've done too much. It's too much of an obvious line, and just break it down a little bit again. You know, you don't need to show the entire line of the mouth. The brain knows exactly what it is. It just fills in the gaps. Let's go back to our eraser. Let's go back to those lovely bright kind of 70% details here. Let's try and brighten up even more on the top of the head. So I'm going to go back to about sort of 75%, small 1% size. And then over here on the right, where my lighting in a minute is going to be flowing through and onto our fish, I'm going to emphasize some more scales, emphasize some areas that we'd already previously done. Zoom all the way out. Let's take a look at where we are. Let's go ahead and just follow this line down here a little bit as well, just kind of brightening that up a tiny bit more. Likewise, I think just along the edge there of the face. Lovely. I like how the face has got a nice sort of soft look to it. It's not too vibrant. Now, before you carry on, I think it's best now to add in some light rays. So what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to tap on this layer and add a mask, because we're erasing from this layer already. I don't want to add in an element that's equally another part of erasing. By adding a mask, you can then switch between the two. So you can go to the mask, make sure your brush now changes to the option of airbrushing and the soft brush. You want your color set to black. Size wants to vary. Let's just start it at like a 5%. And we're going to just draw in some light beams, really, really light with your pressure. If you need to, lower your opacity, but just some straight lines across your design. So just like a few like there, a few like that. I'm going to try and draw it again. Hold your pen down if you need to get a nice straight line. And I'm going to pivot out all from the kind of top right corner and just bringing in some nice beams of light coming through. You do want to be able to see them, but you equally don't want them to be too sort of garish. And then set your brush size to like a 15 to 20%. And in the top right corner, I'm going to go even bigger than that. I'm going to go to 20. I'm going to go round in a circular motion to kind of just show that up here is nice and bright. And then that helps those lines. We understand what those lines are now. The beams. We understand that they're lighting that's coming across the scene. So you can just give yourself a nice little light source and then some beams coming across. It makes it a little bit more dynamic. And if you don't like any of it, well, of course, you can switch your color back to white. You could, for example, like kind of paint out one of those kind of glowy lines and redo them if you need to. So you could just, get rid of them completely up and towards that glow and then redo it. Take your time, switch it back to black and just draw them in like so. See what you come up with. Various sizes as well if you can. Go down to like a 3 and a 5 and then that will give you some nice, again, variation in your beams. I'm just going to draw in a line across. Set my brush size to like 6%. Come across from that point. Seeing what I can do. And that looks pretty good. I think I might leave it exactly like that. And then we'll go ahead and go back to the layer. We'll tap on the layer part and not the mask. And you can just carry on erasing. Go to 100%. See what kind of things you can do now. Because now you've got your light source. You've got the absolute brightest areas. You can now just keep erasing in there. And see what kind of super bright tones that you think you can bring into play. Now, don't go mad with it. Really take your time still. Don't do too much. But you can now just randomly cast in some much brighter areas of color, especially like on edges. Edges will look amazing. Just keep it nice and kind of sharp at the same time. So don't do too many that are too bulky. And occasionally maybe like a little dash or two. They need to be in the right areas. So this is like a little sort of refinement stage of this. Now, to be honest, I could probably leave mine exactly like that, with the exception that I would probably smudge my border a little bit more, just give it a softer look. Also maybe a bit of an underwater look as well. I don't get rid of all of the border because I like to have a little bit of kind of that texture of the charcoal. One thing that I think looks the best is when you have it so you don't go right to the very edge. So if you need to, just grab your eraser again, tap on your eraser and go to the soft brush under airbrushing. Set your size to like a 15% and just kind of erase from the very edge so that it kind of does flow out into just white on the very edges. So I always just triple check that it has that nice kind of boxed look to it. And the other thing, if you want to get rid of your reference, just tap on it, hit the cross in the corner, it's gone, and then pinch with 2 fingers, go full screen with 4, and you end up with today's finished design. So I hope you enjoyed another charcoal tutorial. Let me know in the comments down below what you thought of today's design. Share your finished design with me over on Instagram and Facebook. They're the best places for me to see your finished work. And if you want even more tutorials from me, you can come and join me over on Patreon, where I've been posting exclusive tutorials to my Patreon supporters every single month. I post 3 of them actually, to a catalogue that sits now at over 130 exclusive tutorials. So if you want to get access to all of that content, make sure to check out my Patreon in the description down below. And if you could do me a solid and subscribe to the channel, that'd be amazing. I've posted a weekly tutorial here on my YouTube channel for the last 4 years, and I will continue to do so. So don't miss out on all that content. And if you like this video here on YouTube, you'll love this duckling as well. Thank you so much for watching. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next one.